there is an age-old debate about the relationship Jesus and Paul had with the Torah, also known as the Law of Moses. I think this relationship can best be explained by the word diplomacy. Now, according to the Oxford Dictionary, the profession, activity, or skill of managing international relations, typically by a country's representatives abroad. I think this almost describes Jesus and Paul to a T in the NT. If you think about it, both of these men were skilled professionals managing international relations. That is, between Israelis, Jews, and Gentiles, back then the Greco Romans. So we have Jesus on the one hand, who is the head of that country of God, if you will, the king of the coming kingdom of God on earth. On the other hand, we have Paul, his apostle, apostolos, the one he sent as his representative. So it might not come as a surprise to see how similar their missionary work among their fellow Jews was. For example, we have in Luke 6:6, Jesus once again teaching in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Yet in Matthew 12 and Mark 2, Jesus pronounces himself and his followers, by implication, lords of the Sabbath. That is, as owners of a day of rest that was originally made for man and not man made for the Sabbath, Jesus and in turn his apostles are free to rest or not to rest. Note what Jesus' response to fellow Jews who accuse him of breaking the Sabbath day in John 5:17 is, "To this very day my Father is at his work, and I too am working." In Matthew 15, Jesus demands that you honor your father and your mother. And that was according to the law of Moses given in passages like Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. Yet, in Luke 14, Jesus warns that if you choose your parents over him, you cannot be a Christian at all. In Matthew 17, Jesus tells his apostles to pay the Torah mandated temple tax, part of the law of Moses. Yet, in that same story, he gives the reason why, so that we do not offend them. Now, by them, Jesus is talking about Torah observant Jews. At one point in Matthew 23, Jesus even says to do everything those sitting in the place of Moses say. Yet, we know that throughout the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly is found arguing, sometimes correcting, even threatening those same Pharisees. Later, we see how Paul adopted this similar diplomatic way of dealing with his fellow Jews. In Acts 13, we find Paul teaching in the synagogue on the Sabbath day, just like Jesus. In Acts 20, we find Paul in a hurry to reach Jerusalem, says Luke, in time for the festival of Pentecost. Yet, Paul is writing letter after letter to the early churches, warning them not to let anyone judge them for not celebrating or not observing a Jewish festival day or a new moon or even the Sabbath day itself. And that's Colossians 2:16 and also Galatians 4:10. In Acts 16, Paul even circumcised Timothy because of the Jews. Similarly, Jesus in Matthew 8 likewise appeased his fellow Jews when he tells the person he just healed to present himself to the temple priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded. Yet, Paul labels some Jews, the circumcision party, and even describes them as dogs, evildoers, mutilators of the flesh in Philippians 3:2. And Paul again warns churches, mark my words, I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. Galatians 5:2. In Acts 21, towards the end of his missionary career, Paul is told by James, who was the Lord's brother no less, to take a Torah-mandated Nazirite vow along with a 7-day temple purification rite. The reason, James tells Paul, is because we are under the impression, Paul, that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to forsake Moses. Now, the Greek there literally reads apostatize from Moses. This is a loaded term used here by James. As Ellicott's commentary says, it has all its burden of evil import, adding weight to the charge. Now, why? Well, because according to James, Paul was telling fellow Jews not to circumcise their children or observe their customs. Yet, just before Paul is killed in Rome, he testified before both Roman and Jewish authorities in Acts 25, I have not broken the law of my people. I have not done anything against either the temple or the emperor. Okay, so what is happening here? The only way to harmonize these seeming contradictions is by way of what I call Christian diplomacy on the part of both Jesus and Paul. Or, as Paul himself defines diplomacy in 1 Corinthians 9, in order to win people. And I like this paraphrase from the Good News Translation. Note that phrase, in order to win. Verse 19, Paul said, I am a free man, nobody's slave, but I make myself everybody's slave in order to win as many people as possible. While working with the Jews, I live like a Jew in order to win them. By the way, this is an odd thing for someone to say if they remained Torah observant, that is subject to the law of Moses. Think about that. And even though I myself, says Paul, I am not under the law or subject to the law of Moses, I live as though I were when working with those who are, in order to win them. There's that phrase again. In the same way, when working with Gentiles, I live like a Gentile outside Jewish law, the Torah, in order to win Gentiles. This does not mean that I do not obey the law of God, because I am really, says Paul, under the law of Christ. Note, just because Paul is not under the, shall we call it, old covenant law of Moses, it does not mean Paul is lawless any more than any Christian that followed him, because now we are subject, like Paul, to the law of Christ, which Paul here in this verse, by the way, calls the law of God, and Jesus calls the commandments of God. That's Revelation 12:17 and 14:12. Hence, Paul says in verse 22, among the weak in faith, I became weak like one of them in order to win them. There's that phrase. So I become all things to all people that I may save some of them by whatever means are possible.